very excited about today's talk. So our speaker today is Gordon Wetzstein. Gordon Wetzstein is very well known in the computational imaging community. Gordon is an associate professor of electrical engineering and computer science at Stanford University, and he leads the Stanford Computational Imaging Lab. And he's also the faculty co-director of the Stanford Center for Image Systems Engineering. You will see in his talk that Gordon's research is at the intersection of computational optics, graphics, AI, and applied vision science. And this all enables applications in imaging, variable computing, and neural rendering systems. And I should also mention that Gordon is the recipient of numerous awards. Too much to tell all awards here today. This would be like a 1-hour talk by itself, but just to name a few, the NSF Korea, the Picasso Award, the SPIE Early Career Achievement Award, Electronic Imaging Scientist of the Year, Alfred P. Sloan Fellowship, and SIGGRAPH Significant Research Award. So Gordon, we are very, very excited to have you here today, and we're really looking forward to your talk. And we hope that your talk, will generate a vivid discussion after the talk. So Gordon, the stage is yours.
Well, thank you so much for the introduction, Florian. It's great to be here virtually with you today. And I'm only going to talk about some of the aspects of our work in the lab and what I think is most relevant for maybe you guys, all of you. And that is this idea of using AI to co-design algorithms and hardware for a number of different applications in applied and computational optics. And that includes cameras, displays, and maybe some optical computing systems. So let me just start with a motivating example, just to set the stage a little bit. If I asked you, and this is a little bit difficult to do remotely, but if I asked you what breed of dog this is, I would think that very few people could actually tell me. This is a soft-coated Wheaton Terrier. I wouldn't have known this, but many people are bad at this task. However, computers are really good at classifying dogs or objects in general. Classification algorithms in computer vision have exceeded human accuracy already a number of years ago, and they can classify thousands of different image classes, including more than 120 dog breeds, very reliably. They're trained on data, and they just perform this task really well. Now, most people in computer vision just think about the input of their algorithms to be a clean and nice digital image, and the output to be a classification label. But as we all know, there's a lot of design, engineering, and prototyping necessary to even get to the point where you can get an image. So what does it actually take in the real world to classify what's in an image? Well, first, there's a physical object, for example, this bunny. It's illuminated in the scene by some light source. And then there's been a lot of work by many different people that goes into this whole pipeline. First, there are optical designers and engineers who design the optics of the camera. And typically they do this by minimizing aberrations, the blur size, chromatic aberrations, distortions, lots of low-level engineering around the point spread function, basically. There are people designing the sensor and the electronics reading that out. Then there are a bunch of people in low-level computer vision or signal processing who have developed really great algorithms to process the raw data that's being read out of the sensor. And this includes aspects such as demosaicing, denoising, deconvolution or deblurring, white balancing, and many other steps. Typically, we refer to this as the image signal processing pipeline, the ISP. So think about this as a low-level computer vision pipeline. And people in computer vision work on neural network design these days. They set up, for example, large CNNs that will minimize some kind of a semantic loss during training. For example, a classification error or a segmentation error or other high-level tasks. So these neural networks process the sRGB image that comes out of the ISP and give you a class label. All of these are part of the pipeline that photons have to undergo first before the classification label of this being a bunny comes out by the algorithm. So many people have done an amazing job at each of these components for a long time. However, this compartmentalized approach also has limitations. So if we think about only the optics, then we can do really interesting things and design the optics. But it is typically done without really considering what type of denoising algorithm or ISP will process this data. And people in computer vision work on their neural networks like AlexNet or VGG or other types of networks, and they don't really think about the optics or the low-level processing. Now, this is a mistake, as I'll try to convince you in this talk. The applications for cameras and ISPs are really different. If you think about autonomous driving, consumer photography, professional photography, surveillance, wearable computing, maybe aerial imaging or remote sensing, all of these applications have different requirements. They're very different, yet most cameras are designed as a general purpose solution, and the ISPs don't really change all that much between all these different applications. Now, if we look at nature, for example, at animal eyes, it's very different. This is a mantis shrimp, and the visual system and the eyes of the mantis shrimp are very different from yours. The mantis shrimp has a compound eye, which has very low spatial resolution, but it has very high spectral resolution, for example. Some mantis shrimp species are reported to have up to 16 different types of photoreceptors on their retina, and they use that to sense 12 different color bands in addition to polarization. So clearly, nature has come up with a variety of different sensors and the brains in a way that where these two parts are co-evolved and specifically adapted to their environments. This mantis shrimp sees polarization probably because there's a lot of semi-transparent prey underwater where it lives. And rather than seeing them directly, maybe it observes the polarization changes from the sunlight that goes through the water. So the point I'm trying to make is that in nature, it's commonplace to have domain-specific imaging systems or vision systems, but we don't really do that too much, at least, in imaging and computer vision. So the idea of computational imaging or computational photography is to do exactly that, to co-design the optics, the sensing, and the computation. This is the field that I've been in for a long time, and seminal contributions like Ed Dowski's wavefront coding ideas and things like that really revolutionized this field. There are other examples like high dynamic range imaging. You probably know that in your cell phone, when you press the shutter button, the phone doesn't just capture a single image, it actually captures a burst of images and fuses them together to extend the dynamic range, to denoise the image, and to do a bunch of other processing. So this is a really popular example of computational photography, but there are things like super resolution, extended depth of field, light field imaging, or even compressive imaging. They're all examples of interesting computational imaging approaches. However, they are still not designed in an end-to-end fashion. They're still designed in a compartmentalized fashion where somebody sat down and said, here's the way we should capture the image, and here's the way we should process it. The idea I'm going to try to convince you to be a good one, which I call deep optics, is that we can use an end-to-end design to automate this design process. And when I talk to a computer vision audience, then everybody's familiar with this concept of algorithms design. Algorithms are not really handcrafted or handwritten anymore. They're automated using neural networks. So we take a neural network architecture, which has certain parameters like the weights and bias values, for example, in a CNN, and then we take a data set and we send this data set through a randomly initialized neural network over and over again, evaluate a loss function that is differentiable, and then we backpropagate the error back into the parameters of the network. And after a long training time on the cloud, on some GPU, we get back the specific parameters of a network that performs hopefully well also in tasks that generalize beyond the training data set. Now, you can use the same methodology to design the hardware in the system. And this approach, this joint design of hardware and software, is what I'm advocating for. This is an end-to-end design, which can be useful. It can be useful, for example, to design application domain-specific cameras. And what is an application domain-specific camera? Well, think about a camera that only does one thing. It maybe only records barcodes and detects them, or maybe you design a camera and its only purpose in life is to classify cats. You know, how would such a camera look like? It may not be the same as the type of camera that you were using today, which is a fantastic design for general purpose cameras, but what does an application domain specific camera look like? That is the question. So the idea of end-to-end optimization of optics and image processing is to train both hardware and software together jointly in simulation in a pre-processing step. This is the training stage. And the way we can think about this is that there's a physical layer and a digital layer. The digital layer can comprise a neural network or an ISP or other low-level processing algorithms. And the physical layer can comprise things like the lens or a compound lens or other parameters in hardware that can be optimized. At inference time, so at runtime, after you've trained it, you want to fabricate the physical layer, for example, by fabricating the lens or fixing other hardware parameters. Now, there may be a mismatch between your simulation and the physical prototype. That's sort of unavoidable in many cases. So in that case, once you've fabricated the hardware, you may want to refine the digital layer to adjust for the differences of the simulator. But the way I think about this system is it's pretty intuitive. It's just adding a physical layer on top of a neural network. But there are two ways I interpret this type of an approach. The first one is we can think about this as an optical encoder and an electronic decoder system. And in this case, the sensor is really the bottleneck. The optical encoder takes the electromagnetic radiation that the camera observes and encodes it onto the discrete sensor. And it does so by integrating over a bunch of different dimensions. And that means it's going to integrate over the pixel area. It's going to integrate over the incident angles. It's going to integrate probably over the different polarization states. It's going to integrate over a whole bunch of wavelengths. It's going to integrate over a number of different depths. And the sensor is also going to clip the dynamic range of the signal and result in a limited dynamic range. So the sensor is really the bottleneck, and it removes irreversibly so in many cases a lot of the optical information that was in the visual signal that was present at the time. So now the goal for the decoder would then be to take these discrete measurements from the sensor and reconstruct the signal that was there. So think about multispectral imaging, high dynamic range imaging, depth imaging, and so on and so forth. So this is this idea of thinking about this as an optical encoder electronic decoder system. Another way to think about this is a hybrid optical electronic neural network. It's simply a digital layer that can be a neural network, and maybe we want to outsource parts of this network into a physical layer, and we just treat the whole thing as a neural network and part of it is executed in analog on the photons rather than on the electrons. So I'll give you a couple of different examples of projects we've worked on recently that fall into one or the other category here. Let's start with something that's mostly relevant for the image processing. So I'm not going to talk too much about the optics part in this specific case study. Again, I usually start with the question to the audience, but it's a little bit challenging to do over Zoom. So I'll just give you the answer. So if I asked you what's in this picture, probably most of you would tell me that this is a cappuccino or latte or something like that. Humans are pretty good at this task, actually. Now, the task is low light imaging. Can you tell me what's in an image when the image is really noisy? So humans are good at this. Computers, not so much. If you take what was a state-of-the-art classification network back when we worked on this, it would tell you that this is a toilet seat. Now, this is obviously not the correct answer. So what's going on? Well, the image is noisy and the network hasn't been trained on noisy data. Sure. So what we can do is we can just take the noisy raw image and we send it through a state-of-the-art ISP. So for example, we can, in this case, apply a state-of-the-art denoising algorithm, such as BM3D, the block matching 3D method. This gives us a really nice image. It looks pretty good for the noisy input we saw for human, but it still introduces other artifacts that makes it not optimal for an algorithm to look at these data and tell you what's in it. It's still misclassified as a spotlight in this case. So the point I'm trying to make here is that when we design this pipeline, and forget about the optics for a second, we can get a lot of benefits by co-designing and jointly optimizing the low-level image processing, the ISP, together with the high-level image processing. Now, low-level vision and high-level vision are different in the sense that the low-level pipeline typically still has information about the physical sensor module. So it has access to some physical parameters, such as vignetting, the point spread function, the Bayer color filter array mosaic, or other parameters. And we want to use this knowledge. We don't want to use a black box approach where we just learn some black box neural network, because that's not a great approach. We want to use all the physical information that we know and learn the parts that we can't model easily. So typical low-level pipelines look like this. There's going to be a whole bunch of different stages, and any small error in one of these blocks is going to propagate through the entire pipeline, and there's no way back. So a differentiable version of this could look like this. At least this is how we designed the low-level vision pipeline, is we wanted to have a differentiable version of this, and we used an unrolled neural network. What's an unrolled neural network? It is an iterative optimization scheme, such as using ADMM or something else, something lighter weight perhaps, that you run for a fixed number of iterations. And if you fix the number of iterations of an iterative solver that does denoising, deconvolution, and all these things, you can actually think about it as an unrolled series of steps that are deterministic, and you can think about it as an unrolled network. So it's a recurrent neural network that just applies the same update steps multiple times, and part of this update can be the physical parameters that you know. So once we have a differentiable version of this low-level vision pipeline, we can train it end-to-end together with the high-level vision pipeline. And this is what we did for the task of image classification in noise. So as I was showing you before, on the left, we see two different input images that are both very noisy. They're both misclassified in this case, and the PSNR sort of approximating the image quality is low. If you apply a state-of-the-art denoising pipeline to this, the PSNR is actually pretty high, and the images look good to a human observer, but they're still misclassified. This is not a problem of BM3D because it was designed to give you pleasantly looking images, but a pleasantly looking image for a human is not necessarily what an algorithm would like to see. So if you just allow the low-level pipeline to adapt to the high-level classification task, you will automatically get the best performance for the loss function you define, in this case, the classification loss. What's interesting is that the PSNR and the image quality of our intermediate images is actually lower than that of BM3D. And that's perfectly fine, because the pipeline is not designed to give you nice looking images. It is designed to give you the most accurate classification results. So in the paper, we did lots of ablations and tested this with, co-designed algorithms and many different variants. And this joint optimization of ISP and classification was simply the best and most robust. Okay, so this was motivating but intuitive. Like if you just make the whole algorithm optimizable, it performs better, right? So let's think about the optical part. Here's a really challenging problem. It's called monocular depth estimation. The task is to take a single RGB image that you can capture and compute a per pixel depth map from the RGB data. This is an ill-posed inverse problem, very challenging. It's actually impossible to solve it correctly with the absolute depth. So what have people done? Well, people have done things like point spread function engineering. The point spread function encodes depth-dependent information on the sensor. If you have a point that's in focus, it's going to be in focus on the sensor, you get a nice sharp PSF. Maybe if you're lucky, a diffraction limited PSF. If there's a point out of focus, it's going to be blurry, right? So all of you have probably seen these types of plots in many of your courses or in your research. If diffraction limited point spread function looks sort of like this. If you're in focus, it's great. If you're out of focus, well, not so much. And this point spread function still includes valuable information because we know that the larger the point spread function is, the farther away you are from the focal plane. So using this information for depth estimation is called depth from defocus. The maybe not so intuitive insight here is, though, that if we have aberrations, for example, in our lenses, they can help make the depth estimation problem less ill-posed. So, for example, if you look at the top PSF, that's monochromatic, it's actually symmetric around the focal plane. So there's some ambiguity. You don't know which side of the focal plane you're on, even if you know what depth any size of the PSF corresponds to. If you look at a chromatically aberrated image, that ambiguity is not there. You know exactly which side of the focal plane you're on. However, chromatic aberrations make the image look worse. So typically, a lot of people spend a lot of time and money on trying to get rid of them. But if your goal is to do depth estimation, that can be helpful. And if you now randomize or optimize your maybe a diffractive optical element or refractive optical element in the Fourier plane, you can do things like point spread function engineering, where you can create pretty wild looking point spread functions that vary spectrally and in depth. So we want to use this idea of point spread function engineering to optimize a depth estimation network. And we do this exactly like I described before. There's a training data set of RGB images that have corresponding depth maps. So this is a simulated data set. We parameterize the optical part that we want to optimize as a diffractive optical element in the Fourier plane. This diffractive optical element creates a depth-dependent point spread function, which we convolve the training data with to simulate a sensor image with noise. We then pre-process this sensor image and feed it through a convolutional neural network that estimates both per pixel RGB image. So the sensor image is blurry and noisy. The prediction should be sharp. And we want to get a per pixel depth map. This is fed through a loss function. And the important thing is that everything is differentiable. So we can backpropagate the loss not only into the parameters of the network, but also into the phase profile of the diffractive optical element. So we jointly optimize, in this case, the DOE and the CNN. Now, in this case, for computational efficiency, we use the rotationally symmetric design for the DOE. Here's what we optimized. Looks kind of like this in simulation. And here it is fabricated using a grayscale lithography step. We mount this on a camera lens that we disassembled right into the aperture plane, and then captured images with a conventional camera using this modified lens. It's a phase-coded aperture. Now, a conventional camera, basically the reference camera, captures images that look really nice. But if you use the same depth estimation network that we're using to try to estimate a per pixel depth map, it's not going to work very well because the network gets confused. It doesn't really know where's what in depth. If you capture images with our phase-coded camera, they always look blurry. They never look sharp. But the blur is what encodes all the information. It's an engineered blur. And processing these coded images with our network allows us to get a sharp image that's sharp everywhere and also a per pixel depth map. So the estimated depth map here looks significantly better than the estimated depth map with the same type of network, same number of parameters and so on. And it's trained in simulation, but it generalizes still pretty well to real-world settings. We just took the camera outside and took a couple of photos. It was never trained on flowers or plants. It was only trained on this simulated data set I showed you before. So, jointly optimizing hardware and software improves the accuracy and generalizability also. So this is great. Where's maybe a potential killer app? Well, it could be in localization microscopy, where you want to estimate the 3D locations of individual emitters in a 3D setting. This is important in fluorescent microscopy. where you take a broadband light source, send it through an excitation filter, you excite a fluorescent specimen, such as a labeled cell, neurons, or whatever you want, that re-radiates light at a longer wavelength, which is filtered and detected. Now, if you have to do this fast, you can only capture a 2D image rather than a focal stack or something else. So the idea would be to take a single image and estimate the 3D location of one or multiple of these point emitters. If you look at a conventional microscope design again, and here we see a single point moving above and below the focal plane, we're going to think about this as having an objective lens, a Fourier plane, a tube lens, and the sensor. And if you look at the recorded sensor image, you can see that our 3D point will be in focus, and then it's nice and sharp. But the depth of field of the system is so shallow because the numerical aperture is high that it gets out of focus so quickly that we just don't see anything anymore. So people came up with lots of great ideas in this space. For example, W.E. Murner here at Stanford with other collaborators developed this double helix point spread function, and they used a faceplate that they mounted in the Fourier plane to engineer the point spread function to not be a single point that goes in and out of focus, but it's basically 2 points that rotate with the depth. And if you can detect these 2 points and the relative angle between them, you know what depth that point is. So this is already now almost 15 years old, this work, and it was really nice and changing the way we can capture these images. People have done a lot of work in the meantime on point spread function engineering. So you can use astigmatism, for example, to try to estimate the depth, and then you also remove this ambiguity between below and above the focal plane. The double helix point spread function is an example that I mentioned. You can use multiple point spread function at once, for example, 2 imaging paths that are optically overlapped but focus at different depths, sort of like a focal stack, but you can actually capture this simultaneously. Then you get additional information. Joaf Schechtman and W.E. Murner and others have optimized these point spread functions also using Fisher information, for example. And that's a really great metric for a single emitter, but it doesn't work for multiple dense emitters over large depth ranges, for example. So we've worked on this topic a little bit and considered a setup where we have either a single optical path with a phase-coded Fourier plane or also multiple optical paths. Our prototype in the lab actually has 2 optical paths where we can insert 2 different diffractive optical elements. So we use the same idea that I showed you earlier, where we simulate target volumes in 3D of emitters with a certain density, depth range, and so on. We have 2 phase masks, one in each of these optical paths that create different point spread functions. We have the sensor image, add noise and background in this case too. And then we have a localization network that gives us the super resolved volume. Fed into a loss function, we can backpropagate through the whole system and optimize it end to end. The nice thing about this application is that we can generate an infinite amount of training data by just simulating these 3D emitter volumes, basically. It's much easier than actually the monocular depth estimation to train this. We fabricated the diffractive optical element again and compared our PSF simulator for the 2 optical paths here with the experimentally captured data. As the focus goes up and down, you can see that the simulated PSFs match very closely what the experimental data shows. So this is a good sign. And then we captured some data. We're sort of limited in our ability to do biomedical experiments. So we basically used, in this case, fixed cells that have beads inside of them, fluorescent beads. They're fairly bright. And what you can see in this rotating volume here is a 2D image of the cell that's projected through the entire 3D specimen. And then you can see a bunch of little 3D points, the yellow ones and the magenta ones. And one of them are the ground truth that we estimate from a confocal image. And the other are the images estimated from a single shot that we get. So they're very close, which is great. We also did a bunch of live cell experiments where we again embedded beads into these cells, and we captured them over a course of about 30 minutes. And we can, from a single shot, reconstruct the 3D position of these emitters and track them over time. So this is also really nice. We didn't get to actually test this on single molecule super resolution microscopy, but if folks are interested in this application, I'd be more than happy to chat. Let me tell you about a different project. Now we're using a different, the other interpretation. So far I've been talking about this optical encoder, electronic decoder approach, but now I want to talk a little bit about optical computing. So we all know that computer vision and artificial intelligence is the main go-to algorithm toolbox for processing images these days. And I want to try to convince you that part of the CNN in particular, a convolutional neural network, can be implemented in optics. So in this case, we're going to forget about the ISP, and we're just going to think about the optics and the high-level processing. In our case, we're going to think about image classification again. Can we design an optic that is better for image classification, and maybe not even better, but that just executes parts of the functionality of a CNN directly in optics? So this idea is learning optics and CNN jointly. So we did this by doing a proof of principle where we consider a two-layer neural network, a two-layer CNN that is comprised of an all-optical CNN layer that's implemented only in optics and that requires no power during runtime, and a single fully connected layer that's executed digitally. Now, the fully connected layer is a trivial implementation. It's just a matrix vector multiplication with a nonlinear activation function, so I don't want to talk about it. The key challenge is this all-optical CNN layer. How can we implement a single layer of a CNN in optics? Well, before I tell you how, let's just make sure that we all understand what a single layer of a CNN actually does. It takes an input image, it convolves this input image with multiple different convolution kernels, so multiple different PSFs if you want, and then it stacks them all on top of one another. That is the output of a single convolution layer, specifically the first layer of the convolution where you only have a single channel as input. Later layers will have multiple channels as input. But this first layer is basically just taking a single channel, and by single channel, I mean single image with RGB channels, potentially. So how do we implement this same functionality in optics? Well, we can take our physical scene that's in front of the camera. We design a point spread function using a diffractive optical element in the Fourier plane. And what this will do is it has a PSF that comprises multiple Dirac peaks, and each one of them have a blur kernel encoded around them. So I'll show you in a second what that means. But the basic idea is that the multiple different kernels will create optically copies of the input images at different locations of this on the sensor. And each of these copies of the input are blurred by a different engineered PSF. And each engineered PSF resembles a convolution kernel in a conventional CNN. If you then crop these images and stack them, you get the same, ideally, as what you'd get with a multi-channel convolution electronically. Okay, hopefully this was clear. I can maybe answer questions if there are any later. And the idea how we wanted to implement this was similar to the projects I told you earlier. We wanted to use a phase-coded aperture, like a diffractive optical element, put it in the aperture plane of a camera, record an image, and then only run a single fully connected layer after. We did prototype this back in 2018 with a classical 4F system that was implemented on a benchtop, where we have a little DMD that shows many different digital images. There's a lens. Here's our diffractive optical element in the Fourier plane, another lens, and the camera. The diffractive optical element that we optimized looks kind of like this. It's at least in broad daylight. It's about 1 by 1 centimeter in size, and it looks sort of random. Has many different patches with different gradings, and so on and so forth. It does create these copies and the blur. If we just use a laser pointer and shine it through it, I mean, it looks kind of cool, but you can also start to see these copies appearing here in the background. Now, if we mount it in the system that I showed you earlier, what we get is the following. We display an image on the DMD. This is from a small and low resolution data set called CFAR10, 32 by 32 pixel input images. We show that on the DMD. On the sensor, we record raw images that look like this, so you can clearly see all these copies, and each copy is differently blurred. There's a little bit of a DC term here. That's because of the non-perfect diffraction efficiency of the DOE, but it didn't affect the results too much. We crop all these different copies, run them through a single fully connected layer, and get our classification accuracy for the different object classes. And what we were able to show with this was that you can get basically in the same power budget as the single layer, get twice the classification accuracy, or basically half the power for the same classification accuracy. So this can be useful if you're working on a really power constrained setup, because you can outsource part of the computation into the optics that don't require necessarily any power or memory. Or this could be useful for low latency systems like autonomous driving, when you have to make decisions very fast and you can't wait for the data to be quantized, digitized, read off the sensor, read out of memory, and so on and so forth. Okay. How are we doing on time? I think we have a little bit more time. So let me tell you one more idea where end-to-end optimization is useful, and I call this neural sensors. The idea is a little bit different now, but same spirit. We don't change the optics of the camera in this case, but we use an emerging sensor that has programming capabilities baked into the silicon. So as you may know, sensor manufacturing processes have come a long way in the last decade or so. We now have hybrid wafer level bonding. And what that means is that we can take multiple wafers, stack them on a wafer level, and have direct connections between the wafers on a per pixel level. That's incredible, because you can take the data from each pixel and route it to a corresponding location on the next wafer. We also have triple stacking. So this allows us to do double stacking and triple stacking of CMOS image sensors. So we can put more and more transistors and capacitors directly on the sensor or close to the sensor. And what that allows you to do is you can think about the sensor not just as something that has access to the photodiodes and quantizes the data using an ADC, but it can also do some amount of computation directly on the sensor. And that is cool for multiple reasons. One reason is that you can start doing interesting things directly on the sensor before you even read out the data. And this is what we sort of try to do with this project called Neural Sensors, where we now consider the sensor as a programmable bottleneck, where we can change the way the image is captured. And we tested this for, at least in this project, for high dynamic range imaging, where we changed the exposure times per pixel, and also for high speed imaging. People call this video compressive sensing. The idea is that in video compressive sensing is that you take a single image with a sort of a patterned exposure time, and you try to recover a short video clip from each of these images. So what's happening in the sensor is that there is a per pixel exposure time that can turn on and off throughout the global exposure time. It's different per pixel, and it's not just random, but it's optimized together with the reconstruction network. So if we design this end-to-end and run our network on these captured images, we can actually recover a short video clip from a single image that you can see here. So these high-speed events, such as a popping balloon, a rotating fan, an oscilloscope, this jumping frog, or a drop of water falling into a dish, you can capture high-speed events where the speed of the event may exceed the bandwidth or frame rate of the camera, right? So the problem that this is solving is sort of a toy problem. It's like we want to exceed the bandwidth. We want to record data that's faster than the bandwidth of the camera. And we can do that by optically encoding or electronically encoding that data in something that you'd see on the top and then decoding it into a short video clip. Okay, so now this general idea of end-to-end design of optics, image processing, maybe also sensors, is really powerful. Many papers have been written over the last couple of years in this space. You can use this for many applications like high dynamic range imaging, extended depth of field imaging. You can even implement parts of a neural network in electronics in the chip rather than in the optics. So this is something people have been working on, and we're working on as well. It's a really exciting idea. In the last few minutes, I want to try to convince you that the same idea of end-to-end optimization of algorithms and optics or electronics can also be useful for displays. Now, my group has been working quite a bit on digital holography over the last few years, and I'm going to try to convince you that the same methodology is useful for improving the quality and maybe also speed of computer-generated holography. we typically consider near eye displays. So a near the eye display is something that's close to your eye, but not necessarily wearable. It can be wearable. Our prototypes are typically benchtop prototypes, but the idea of a near eye holographic display, for example, for virtual reality applications, would be you have a coherent or partially coherent source, maybe some collimating optics. There's a spatial light modulator in the optical path. In this case, we don't use an amplitude LCOS or an amplitude SLM, but a phase modulator. So each pixel of the SLM can programmatically delay the phase of the wavefront. This wavefront then continues to propagate, and through diffraction interference, you will observe an image, an intensity image on your retina that is observed through an eyepiece. So the SLMs are small, so the images are small. We need a magnifier to magnify them, okay? The promise for holography is great. It can create 3D images, solves the divergence accommodation conflict in VR. They can maybe correct for optical aberrations of downstream optics. They could correct for your prescription. They can be very light efficient also. There's many potential benefits of holographic displays, which is why it's a great topic for research right now. The challenge here is on the hardware side. How do you make the phase modulators? We don't work on this. Lots of people have done a lot of great work on that space, but now it's a computational challenge in how do you compute the phase patterns that go on the SLM for a given target image or volume. And in theory, you can use your standard phase retrieval method like Gershberg-Saxon or some variant of it. But the challenge is that if you do that, the images that you're going to get out are going to look very grainy and not very good. And the reason is that there's a mismatch between what happens in the physical optics and whatever happens in your simulation. It's really hard to model all the different effects that affect the holographic image formation. So this includes things like optical aberrations, stray light into reflections, but also electronic things happening in the SLM driver board. And it's very challenging to model all of this at the accuracy required to get a clean image. So what we came up with is a family of techniques that we dubbed neural holography. The idea is to put a camera on the system, capture lots of pairs of phase patterns that are shown on the SLM and intensity camera images with the camera focused at these dashed lines. So you want to be able to capture images at different depths for the same phase pattern. And then what we do is we train a neural network to model the wave propagation inside the physical optical display. Now, we don't want to learn something that we can model, so we typically use a residual network approach where we use the angular spectrum method, Fresnel propagation, Fourier propagation, whatever gets us close to what the optics do already. We don't want to throw that away. We don't want to learn that. We only want to learn the difference between this model and what's actually happening in the physics. And so you can think about this as a CNN parameterized version of a wave calibration model. And our method is basically an automatic calibration technique. Once this model is trained, we basically have a fully differentiable model that goes from the phase pattern to the observed intensity on multiple different planes. And now what you can do after you calibrated this model is you can take whatever input you want, for example, an RGBD image, and you can differentiate through this model into the phase pattern and run whatever phase retrieval method you want on this neural network parameterized model. And once you put then the pattern on the SLM, hopefully you get a better representation and better image quality. Okay, so here was our 2020 benchtop prototype of a holographic display. There was a 3-diode laser, RGB, fiber coupled into some collimating optics. There was a phase-only spatial light modulator. This was a holo eye, a liquid crystal on silicon device. There's a 4F system with some filtering, a camera that records the results. And this was just my cell phone camera moving closer, trying to convince you that there's actually an image there. Okay, now we're going to switch to the other camera, capturing RGB in sequence, and then digitally composing it. If you just run Gershberg-Saxon, you get, the image quality is good, but it's not great. It's very grainy. You see all the speckle. The image is only constrained within the white box here, Everything else is like just shown so that you believe me that all of these images are actually captured from our prototype. Now, if we run our 2020 version of a computer-generated holography or neural holography version, the image quality was already improved quite a bit. So back then we got really excited, and other people too, about the high image quality that you can achieve, reducing the speckle to a much lower level. And we were able to capture some video clips also of this open source movie. You can still see some fringe patterns there and some speckle, especially in the white uniform parts, but the image quality was already, this was a significant step forward in terms of image quality. Over the last 2 years, we've been continuing to improve this. Here you can see some of our results that we showed in 2022. So last year at the SIGGRAPH conference. This is an improved version of the neural holography model. And in this case, we used a Texas Instruments MEMS-based phase SLM. And you can see that this is experimentally captured data. It looks really good. This is also 3D, so we're actually focusing the camera back and forth to the foreground and to the background. And you can see that works really well. The quality, especially the contrast, isn't perfect. It's not quite there yet in terms of reaching the same quality as what a nice OLED or an amplitude SLM can get you, but it's getting closer. It's hard to see that this is a hologram and that it is digitally captured. Here's another example. Again, experimentally captured data. We're just zooming back and forth with the camera. If you have questions on the setup, I can elaborate on that also a little bit later. I just don't want to drag out the talk, but this uses time multiplexing. These phase-based, these MEMS-based SLMs are very fast, but they have a very low precision in the phase. Here on the lower left, you can see some remaining fringe pattern, maybe a speck of dust on the optics. But overall, the quality is really good. It's 3D and probably the best quality, the highest quality digital hologram that at least I've seen. Okay, there are many other benefits for holographic near-eye displays. They're not only 3D, but they can also enable new form factors for VR and AR displays. For example, last year at SIGGRAPH, we had another paper in collaboration with NVIDIA, where we used a phase SLM and coupled it directly to a waveguide to create a really thin VR display that is probably the thinnest of its kind. You can basically get rid of all the magnifier optics because the phase SLM has the capability of creating an image that's outside the physical device. But you can read the paper if you want to know more details. As I was saying, holographic displays can be very light efficient. So that's great when you work with really light inefficient waveguides for AR. They can correct for your prescription for the digital images, at least, including astigmatism and higher order aberrations. They can correct for optical aberrations in the waveguide or elsewhere. So they have great promise, but we still have a long way to go to make this really practical display technology. Now, I told you about one thread that's going on in my lab. I call it deep optics, this end-to-end design of optics and image processing. But my lab is actually working on a number of different topics, ranging from computational cameras, single photon imaging, AR, VR, wearable computing. We work on inverse problems, large-scale inverse problems for computational microscopy, and there's a big thread now on neural rendering. This is more like 3D computer vision. I didn't have time to tell you about those, but you can find a lot of information on our website, computationalimaging.org. And all the work that I've shown you was, of course, done by all my students and postdocs, past and present. A lot of this idea of the optical computing part was also discussed in a review paper that came out in Nature 2 years ago that was co-authored with Aydogan Özkan and a bunch of other people that you can see here, Dimitri Psaltis. So I just want to thank my co-authors there and also our sponsors. So I think that gives us sufficient time for Q&A, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. So thanks for your attention, and thanks for coming to the talk.
Yeah, thank you, Gordon, for this very great talk. I think it was very interesting and actually a very, very good overview of one part what your lab is working on. Do we have questions?
Of course.
Yeah. And also Zoom questions, but I cannot see the Zoom attendees.
So I can't really see the Zoom either. So it'd be great if somebody could ask the Zoom questions to me.
Yes. So first we have a question from the room. So I will go to this person. Can you see me, Gordon?
I could see you just now, and now you're outside of the field of view of the camera. But now I see you again. Hello.
Okay. So we have one question from somebody in the audience.
At one point, you showed a picture of what looked kind of like a quilt work faceplate. What exactly was that? How was it constructed?
Oh, yes. This thing here, right?
Yes.
Okay. This is a diffractive optical element. It's about 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter with a feature size of about 2 microns. It has a resolution of maybe, I think, 512 by 512 features. It was fabricated here in our nanofabrication facilities by my student who using grayscale lithography. So this is a lithography process that has, I don't want to say 8 bits in theory, but in practice, maybe less. You could fabricate something like that using multi-level binary lithography too. We just developed this recipe, and that specific student was working on the grayscale lithography part. That's what this element is. Does that make sense?
Yes. Thank you very much. Other questions from the room first? Yeah, I will go. And the Zoom people can ask the questions directly on Zoom. Then I will tell you when.
So you mentioned taking multiple pictures of like the bunny and in one snapshot, right? So was that, you said that was using diffractive optics, but is that like like an array of lenses all projecting onto one sensor, or how's that?
Okay, the question is, how do we get these copies, right? Well, the copies are created with this exact optical element. That is literally the element that we use. It's a diffractive optical element. And what you can see basically is that it has all these patches with gratings. The gratings will create these copies. There's no lens array or anything in there. This grating is in the Fourier plane here, mounted directly there. And it does create the copies. And we fix the location and the number of these copies in a pre-processing step. And then what we optimize during runtime is actually just the kernels that are used to blur each of the copies separately. But the number and location of the copies is fixed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. Other question?
Gordon, my question has to do with long-range imaging. I was just wondering about using some of the techniques that you described to get past a diffraction-limited image. So if you've got a sensor that's diffraction-limited, can you use some of these techniques to get past that? So.
I mean, we can do many cool things, but we can't do magic. Going past the diffraction limit, I mean, there are a number of ideas that you can apply to doing that. One idea is to use sparsity in the scene, for example. If you know that your scene is just comprised of a set of sparse emitters, you can try to localize them. That's sort of like where we wanted to go with this localization project that I showed here. As soon as you go there, you need to be able to image individual fluorescent molecules, and then the number of photons you get is very low. We just weren't equipped as a lab to really get really good experimental data. So to go to your question, I don't have a magic bullet for going beyond the diffraction limit. I would say many of the existing techniques, right, either using sparsity or using illumination, like structured illumination microscopy, or other methods that have been developed, other ideas, can probably be improved using this methodology. You could think about structured illumination microscopy and co-design the aperture plate or the illumination pattern jointly with the phase pattern for the imaging part. I'm sure you can improve that. You can adapt it to different noise levels, for example, but I don't think you can necessarily go beyond the diffraction limit without any other assumptions. Like we can fit a prior to things. That's the same idea as localization microscopy. You make the assumption that the emitters are sparse and you just fit a single point to a blob. And then you say, okay, this is subdiffraction limited, but you didn't actually image it. You just hallucinate that data. And if the signal is indeed sparse, then it works well. But if it's too dense, you can't really do it, right? So I'm not sure if I have a magic bullet for that.
Okay,
I
thank
wish
you.
I did. So,
That would be pretty good, yeah. So we have more questions from the Zoom people. Unfortunately, I don't see who has a question, so the Zoom people have
Kevin has a question.
organized themselves.
I have a question.
Yeah,
Can you guys hear me?
yeah. No.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Gordon. Long time no see. I'm really excited by the deep optics and Suyun's work for the CGH. Just kind of curious, when you spoke before about the alignment issues, I was curious with the synthetic data you guys were using. What modalities have you tried to get around dealing with misalignment at at runtime?
you mean for these kinds of data here in this depth estimation problem, or in general?
In general, I guess. I mean, it's a classic, I guess, problem.
Yes. So as I was mentioning, when you fabricate something, it never comes out the way you want it. There are certain tolerances, and you can bake in a lot of these tolerances into the training stage. And what you could do, for example, if you can't exactly know what height profile your DOE has, you can try to inject noise, for example, into the training stage, which allows your network to, it takes away the confidence that it is exactly one height. You can add this randomization to try to make it more robust. You can also do things like refining the network after you fabricated the lens. And this is typically something we do.
Oh, I see.
So once you fabricate the lens, you put it in the system, we actually measure the PSF, and then we take but the measured PSF looks slightly different from the simulated PSF.
Right.
So for example, here, I showed this example. These are two PSFs next to each other. On the bottom is our simulated PSF for the microscope. On the top is the captured PSF. Now, it took a lot of work and effort to get these captured images, but they're still not perfect. The PSF that we measure is not perfect and is also noisy, right? So the network that we pre-trained hasn't seen those PSFs. It's slightly different. So what we do is we take the captured PSF, fit a parametric model to that, which is slightly different from the one we had simulated before, and then we refine the network and adjust its parameters after the fact to match that.
A little more extra training then.
It's extra training, yes. So you have to account for this. And there are a number of factors that are relevant here. It's like the precision of the fabrication, feature size, noise also. There could be stray light or many other parameters. So it's challenging. But in this case, it's possible because we have a fairly simple optical setup. In all cases that I showed you, there's a single diffractive layer, right? Like we're never talking about multiple diffractive layers that have to be aligned to micron precision.
Right, the alignment goes crazy.
So then, it gets a lot more difficult, I would say.
We'll call a Godin at that point, figure out how he's doing it. I'll ask kind of how he's doing it with the multiple layers.
Yeah, multiple layers, I would say, is great in simulation if you have large feature sizes or work on terahertz wavelengths. I think it's feasible, but when you go to visible, it gets. I mean, I don't want to be the person who has to calibrate that setup.
Gotcha.
Thank you. And I think we have one more question on Zoom.
Here is a question.
Only one?
Yes, thank you. I'm really interested in the presentation about PAF engineering, but I'm wondering how can you show that the PFF you designed with neural network is better than the usually PFF, like for the single camera depth estimation, you elaborate this with a comparison between the phase modulated camera and a normal camera, but the network you are using is specifically trained for the phase modulated camera. I'm wondering, is there a universal criteria for just determining which hardware is better, like in information theory, the channel capacity?
Oh, yes, great question. So if I may paraphrase it, it's what makes us confident that these optimized PSFs are actually better than a conventional PSF, or what criteria do we use? Well, in this case, our criterion is task specific. It is a metric that is applied to the quality of the depth map in simulation during training, right? So here I'm only showing qualitative results, and the qualitative result and comparison that I'm showing here is the following. This is a conventional image captured by a conventional camera, the reference camera, same lens, same sensor, same everything, same conditions as this one over here. The network that processes this image is pre-trained on this PSF, on a standard PSF, to do depth estimation. And this is as good as it gets. Again, please consider that the network is trained in simulation on simulated data that don't really look like the real data. So there's two compounding effects here. One is this sim to real gap, like the simulated data that it's trained on is slightly different from the real data that we capture. And the other thing is that the PSF itself is fixed. It's just a fixed focus PSF. Now, what I'm showing over here is the same camera, same lens, same conditions, a captured image with our experimental phase-coded aperture, and then processed with a network that is exactly the same as this, but it is trained end-to-end with a PSF. So in this case, the network didn't do anything different. The network will look different. It is a different network, but it is an optimized network for this specific PSF, and this is an optimized network for this PSF. Qualitatively, it looks a lot better. In the paper, we also extensively analyzed this quantitatively in simulation on data that looks very similar to the training data set. So there's no, domain gap, let's say, and it works quantitatively significantly better. And we experimentally tested it. And so it's more generalizable also. So objectively speaking, in all conditions, this is better. Now, that is only true for this specific task of depth and RGB imaging, right? Like if you just want a nice image, then I would just go with a regular lens. The metric is the task-specific metric. I don't think it is useful to think about a universal metric that tells you which face mask is the best, because if you do that, then you'll probably arrive at the conclusion that a conventional lens is the best, is my guess. But if you do a task-specific thing, then you can squeeze out more performance for that task at the cost of probably being worse at other tasks. And this is what I was trying to allude to earlier on in the talk, where I said, hey, what if you build a camera and it's best specifically designed for one purpose, like classifying cats? You may be able to do better than a conventional lens for this task, but it comes at the cost of being probably worse at other tasks. So I don't want to draw a false picture that we can create something that's better than what optical designers and engineers have been doing for decades. That's not the case. But I think you can do better in a task-specific way. I hope this answers your questions.
Yes, thank you.
Can I ask another question?
So, okay, then one last question. Is there actually somebody else on Zoom who wants to ask a question? No. Okay, then we have one last question from Kevin.
Thank you. Very exciting seeing how you guys are combining electronic networks with the optical case. With your other talks or other paper, Vincent and Alex's stuff on radiance fields, have you guys thought about generalizing it to the optical case as well? And what are your thoughts on how to do that?
Oh, generalize radiance fields to computational cameras?
Yeah.
I haven't thought about it much, to be honest. Like, it may be useful to think about how to design a camera to capture radiance fields for view synthesis or other tasks. I honestly, I haven't done this. We work, let's say my group is fairly divided into these. The neural rendering part is about half the group now, is mostly CS students and a few EE students, mostly CS folks. They work on only these computer vision applications and GANs and radiance fields and so on.
Models,
and then I have a whole bunch of EE students, and that part of the group is mostly working on everything else that involves hardware. CS students don't like to touch hardware. So I haven't thought about it too much. It's an interesting thought, and some people have done it for example, I think there was this paper from Matthew O'Toole called TURF, where they used methods from neural radiance fields to improve direct or indirect time of flight imaging by directly working on the raw data, and they did some interesting stuff there. We haven't done any of this, but it's an interesting thought.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for giving me the last question.
Thank you very much. This was very, very interesting, and I'm confident if you have more questions, then Gordon will be very happy if you write him some emails and ask your questions. And yeah, Gordon, it was great to have you here, and we hope that we can have you here in the future again, maybe in person, and then you can talk about like a different, different part of your projects. Maybe.
Sure, it'd be great. Okay, thanks for the invitation, and thanks everybody for joining.
Yeah, thank you very much, Gordon. Yeah, so let's thank our speaker again.